So you take a centuries-old war between vampires and werewolves, tangle up a little bit of a Romeo and Juliet story at the heart of it, and wrap it up with a gothic, gritty action style. You've got Len Wiseman's directorial debut that spawned a substantial franchise with Underworld. Under cover of night, vampires engage in an age-old battle with their sworn enemies, the lycans, a clan of violent werewolves. Celine, a death dealer trained to exterminate the lycans, was orphaned in the wake of a bloody lycan attack, and turned into a vampire by the elder Victor to exact vengeance upon them. When the lycans take a mysterious interest in Michael Corvin, an exceptional mortal doctor, Celine struggles to save him from a team of lycans. Lucien, a ruthless lycan leader who is believed by the vampire covens to have been slain ages ago, still leads his people from a subterranean lair. Celine insists they lead an incursion to flush out the horde she believes are gathering underground, but Craven, the power-hungry bureaucrat left in Victor's stead, who lusts after Celine, scoffs at this possibility. He is far more concerned with preparing for the elder Amelia's arrival, in order to switch off leadership and awaken the elder Marcus. However, Craven is actually holding a covert allegiance with Lucien, where both parties have their own treacherous motives. Meanwhile, the discovery that the lycans have armed themselves with UV-irradiated bullets leads the vampire army expert Khan duplicating them with rounds filled with silver nitrate, which would inject the liquid directly into the lycan's bloodstream, causing near-instant fatality. Celine, meanwhile, digs deeper into Corvin, trying to learn why the lycans were supposedly tracking him, and following the previous failed attempt by Rays, Lucien goes after Michael himself, and manages to bite him, before Celine escapes with Corvin. However, the human will soon become a lycan upon the next full moon, causing a rift between Celine and the Coven, especially when she awakens Victor from his slumber, to cut through the deception surrounding recent events. Ultimately, the truth proves to be unheard of, as Lucien believes Michael to be descendant of the Corvinus bloodline, the immortal whose sons became the first vampire lycan through a viral mutation. If Lucien gains the blood from him and a vampire elder, he may become the first vampire lycan hybrid, something Victor slain his own daughter Sonia over centuries ago, when she dared to mate with Lucien. Yet Craven's impulsive betrayal threatens to avert Lucien's plan, and Victor's centuries of secrets come to light, as he is the one who slaughtered Celine's family centuries ago. However, rekindled hope may lie in Michael and Celine, whose burgeoning love may mark a new beginning, in the face of this war's ending. So seeing its theatrical debut on September 19, 2003, Underworld is a film that did spark off a franchise while not being a critical winner. Actually was a big box office winner for Sony through their Screen Gems division and their producing partner Lakeshore Entertainment, with the first film garnering $95.7 million off of a $22 million budget, making a very nice solid success for directing debut of Len Wiseman here. It would come up first through like the prop division and whatnot, through like Roland Emmerich films like Stargate, Independence Day, Godzilla and stuff like that. They kind of transitioned over to a little bit of advertisement and into music videos and stuff like that, so they kind of led up to this point in time where he's developing the screenplay for Underworld with screenwriters Kevin Grevioux and Danny McBride, not the comedian Nag McBride, but Daniel Flynn McBride, who was a stuntman, did a couple other things and did the screenplays for a couple of the other sequels, stuff like that, but it was mainly Grevioux who had this background in chemistry, genetic engineering, psychology, but kind of transitioned over to like studying cinematography and screenwriting in college. It's kind of focusing on developing the mythology and the ideas behind Underworld here, kind of focusing less on the kind of mythological and mystical type of stuff, kind of boil it down a little bit more hard science to a certain degree, to a degree or whatnot, kind of focusing more on vampires and lycans. They're kind of born out of like a genetic virus or whatnot that kind of mutate everything. So a little bit more grounded in that type of way, kind of take a bit of a step back from the more mystical type of things you had going on in other lores. And these three guys really developed everything in concert with one another to the point where they actually got into a little bit of illegal hot water here, because White Wolf Incorporated, who published a lot of books involving vampires and werewolves, especially the ones from Nancy Collins, Vampire the Masquerade and Werewolf the Apocalypse, filed a lawsuit against Lakeshore Entertainment and Sony and stuff like that, claiming that they stole a lot of the ideas and the aesthetics and different things from those novels that they published and stuff like that. So that went on for a couple of years. I think it didn't get resolved until maybe 2008 with a confidential settlement in favor probably of White Wolf Incorporated. And kind of an interesting thing in terms of that type of stuff. Back to like World Wrestling Federation stuff. When they brought in David Heath, who portrayed Vampire Warrior on the independent wrestling circuit, they actually made a deal with White Wolf to use the name Gangrel for his character in the WWF at the time. So a lot of times at the end of like Monday Night Raw and stuff like that, you would see like a little copyright thing every time they used that character on screen, crediting White Wolf Publishing and stuff like that. So interesting thing where one of them really took the precautions and whatnot, really kind of reached out and kind of got something, and the other ones, whether they consciously or unconsciously did something like that, really didn't check their bases on certain things. They got a little bit of problem in that regard going forward and stuff like that. But this one actually did production over in Budapest, probably because there was a better exchange rate for the money and stuff like that, so you get a lot more bang for the buck out of what they're putting in the whole film. And unfortunately, they really didn't have the benefit of a lot of sound stages to work with in Budapest, so they had to find a lot of practical locations that would fit the aesthetics that Len Wiseman wanted for the film. And luckily, Budapest was just rich for everything they want. That kind of like old world Eastern European texture and flavor, that kind of darkness that they wanted the entire film to be kind of enveloped in. And all the stuff they really did get to do on soundstage was the benefit of having production designer Bretton Jones on the whole thing, where he just really just seamlessly integrate the entire thing. Everything feels like one cohesive world inside and out, really giving that centuries-old texture and flavor of like this culture they've had with the vampire lore and everything like that. Really just felt so completely in line with the entire vision here. Just everything is very cohesive overall with the vision, the entire film. It does come off fantastically. How the production design goes along, it has so much rich detail with everything they put together for the entire coven. Very intricate details with all the props and the costumes, all the different things. Just has a full fleshed out world behind every little detail they put into every aspect of the production here. So that really shines through. It shows so much value for the production, and so much the production value of the film is just enhanced with the cinematography here. From veteran cinematographer Tony Pierce-Roberts, who shot films like The Dark Half, Remains of the Day, The Client, Disclosure, and later did the lesser film Doom. But fact of the matter is, he's a very seasoned cinematographer who does a very fantastic job photographing this movie and just making that production design flourish so well in his frame. I think everything he does so well is just, he has this great sense of the lenses and the dynamic angles he uses to just bring a scope to the entire film. And kind of a dramatic weightiness where like you got all the kind of like heavily desaturated, very dark and gray and kind of bluish type of tones going through the entire franchise here, but I think it does a good job just making it feel like it has a weight to it overall. It just feels like it has a certain quality that brings an atmosphere, mood to everything here that kind of attributes to a film that's called Underworld. It feels like something that's kind of like simmering under the surface of the world and stuff like that. It feels like it's a little dark and oppressive and stuff like that. I feel like that just feels like it suits the film overall, what it's doing with the tone, what the entire story is here, all that type of stuff. It just feels like it just feels right for the entire thing. Even though people will probably have some criticism against that, feels kind of dark and dreary. And Len Wiseman's kind of stuck in this sort of visual aesthetic more or less for the rest of his films that he's done. But I still think what Tony Pierce-Roberts does in this whole thing is very, very good stuff. I'm just very impressed overall how the film looks. I think everything in terms of the vision involved comes off extremely well in that regard. And the practical effects from creature designer Patrick Tatopoulos, who ended up being fantastic production designer in his own right later on, are just phenomenal. The fact that Len Wiseman really wanted to do things as much on set, in camera as possible, not rely so much on CGI when you didn't have to, which later in the franchise they really did, and did much worse jobs to it in that degree and whatnot. But the fact that they did everything so practical with guys in suits, having those big, like 7-foot tall lycanthropes in the entire film, with animatronics and performers in the suits and stuff like that, it really aids the production quality of the entire film to see that where you're not doing stuff like Stephen Sommers did at the time with like Van Helsing, where it looks like a really undercooked CGI, badly done visual effects fest in that regard. You want to do things right on set, do those things, have them really well designed, really well constructed, so that they looked absolutely fierce and intimidating, just frightening type of designs they had in this whole thing. It looks fantastic. Everything's so well done in the whole thing. It just reflects so much the overall production design, the care and detail they put in everything else really comes through in those transformed lycanthropes, and also all the stuff they did with the CGI in the whole film that they actually ended up doing through stuff like frame source CFC and Entropic and stuff like that. And they also had miniature effects from Fantasy 2, had worked on stuff all the way back with James Cameron on Terminator and Aliens and Terminator 2. A lot of good people involved in the whole thing that really did a fantastic job to realize everything. Just when you see like they're transforming into the lycanthropes, the big werewolves and everything like that, they look fantastic. They had that nice kind of jerky sort of like bone crunching type of thing you kind of had all the way back with like Rob Bottin's work on The Howling. That kind of quality and whatnot, but added more into a much more modern, much more upgraded type of fashion. You could do a lot more things seamlessly in that regard in one shot. It looks fantastic, and all the stuff they have to do with doing like composites with green screens, of course, like the miniature work in that regard, it all blends seamlessly. Just all so very well done to see how that stuff comes together in the whole thing to create the overall world and not have everything that kind of pulls you up from the whole thing. If you got some bad effects, it really just jars you right in the entire film and just loses the entire reality you got built up the whole thing. So there's a really good type of things. Even like when Celine's at Michael's apartment complex and they have all the lycans kind of running around on the walls, on the ceiling, stuff like that. It moves along so fast that even if there's might be something that might not be as good as the other stuff, it's just like it's such frenetic type of action and so nicely edited together, you don't really notice anything that might fall off to a certain degree. So everything is just performed and executed and conceived and all that type of stuff on such a really high grade level and just done so very well in so many regards. It just comes off extremely well. It just comes off so seamless, and there's some great stunts in the whole thing. Like even following along from that same sequence, you got Celine and Michael kind of escaping in the car from Lucien, and got this great shot where like Lucien's kind of running like 30 miles an hour or something like that right behind the car. They actually had this tarp kind of being towed behind the car where once the thing got started, Michael Sheen or his stunt double would kind of be able to start running behind it on the tarp, which is being pulled along with it, making it look like he's running at like a super speed or whatnot. So you just cover up the tarp with some foreground type of stuff, the entire frame, and all the type of stuff where Michael Sheen is actually the one who runs up on top of the car, and you got the entire thing where he gets knocked back over and flips over top around. Really nice things where they did some composite shots and that thing so very seamlessly, just like it really sells the reality and the abilities of the lycanthropes and the vampires and stuff like that when you get these really well done stunt sequences, some very high grade digital composites that don't show their hand or whatnot, and so very well conceived to just do everything so much in camera. We don't have to do a bunch of green screen type of stuff when you don't have to. It's very good filmmaking in that regard. I very much appreciate that. I've always appreciated that about this film, that really took that time and effort to not just be lazy and laid back on a bunch of green screen composite stuff. I want to take some extra ingenuity and trying to figure out how we can really do this right in the camera. But you can definitely say they kind of borrowed a couple of aesthetics from certain other films like Blade and The Matrix, a lot of the black leather and the trench coats and the certain slow motion with the action sequences, a lot of the gunplay in certain places here and there. It's very much kind of riding the coattails of certain trends going on, where there's a lot of other films kind of feeding off of what The Matrix did and kind of getting off of that style and various other things. So it's pretty much not terribly original, a lot of different things. There's certain other things with the story that definitely feel like they're, maybe not intentionally, but do feel like, okay, that's very much like the stuff with Michael and the whole thing, with him being this sort of pivotal character in this war between these two different factions that he's kind of completely unaware of what this entire thing is all about, kind of thrust in this completely unknown situation. Very much like the Terminator scenario. He is Sarah Connor in this dynamic, and kind of playing a little bit of that Kyle Reese, Sarah Connor romantic sort of storyline between him and Celine really kind of comes through to a certain degree in the whole film. It's not entirely a thing, but still like that dynamic and stuff like that. It's very much kind of in there to a certain degree, kind of masquerading as sort of a Romeo and Juliet type of thing. It's one character between these warring factions and stuff like that. So certain other things feel very familiar to how the film kind of unfolds and certain other concepts go along. But I still think there is a pretty good cast involved with the entire thing. Of course, you've got Kate Beckinsale here as Celine, appearing in 4 out of the 5 films of the franchise. I think she does a pretty solid job overall. The fact that the first film especially is a little colder, a little bit more somber to a certain degree in terms of its tone, so not as much opportunity for the characters to kind of open up and be a little warmer to a certain degree. So in terms of the man she has in the entire film being a lot more dramatic, I think she does pull off everything very, very well here. That cold, aggressive exterior she does have here, it feels like it's kind of masking all that tragic past she has where her family were slain supposedly by the lycans, where it's actually Victor and whatnot, but all that type of stuff she has in her background that's kind of a little more vulnerable, stuff like that. So there are moments where she does feel vulnerable, but she is kind of like putting up that exterior to kind of keep everything at arm's length and not let people in. So it's kind of the thing where you have that scene between her and Michael, stuff like that, where they're kind of relating their backstories and kind of getting a little bit more closer to a certain degree and kind of relate themselves to one another. That is kind of dropping a little bit of that sort of exterior to a certain degree, kind of trying to open the character up a little bit more. But I do feel like when you get into Evolution, the second film, the franchise, they do a much better job to open up her character, make her much warmer, make her much more charismatic and stuff like that. So I think they're able to be a little bit more flexible with their character once you get past the weight of everything that she has going on this entire film, dealing with the subterfuge and the lies and the smoke and mirrors going on the entire thing, where she's not sure who to trust, and all these different people are like duplicitous, and people have all these secrets or whatnot. They're very much kind of like very kind of soap opera-esque. A lot of things in that regard are very much played to that degree in a certain way, where there's a lot of things like lies and deceit and people backstabbing one another, and people got all these different things going on. A lot of different conspiracies and various other things here or there or whatnot. So it plays a little bit on that edge of certain things, but I think Kate Beckinsale does a really good job here to a certain degree, tapping into all the action, being very gung-ho about doing all these things. She was a ballerina, so she did have the athleticism, the kind of fleet of foot type of thing to get into all the stunt work and all the different things she had to get into the whole thing, and she was just a pro in that regard. Did a really fantastic job leading this whole thing, just getting into the action, being very convincing in that regard. But like I said, the emotions in the entire film are a little less than engaging. You can't quite get as attached to the characters as deeply as you'd like to, as you get into the entire thing going on with Scott Speedman being cast as Michael Corvin here, where there's a certain thing in the entire film where there's not as much chemistry between Beckinsale and Speedman in the entire thing. There are moments where, like I said, they are warming up between one another. There's certain things going on, but I don't feel like they don't open the characters up enough to really kind of connect on that sort of very passionate type of level here. That's the one thing kind of missing overall, trying to spark that chemistry between two characters is kind of a passion in a certain way, something deeper or a wound or something else like that to really kind of connect. When you go back again to kind of that Kyle Reese, Sarah Connor relationship, you really do feel that very convincingly in the Terminator there, feeling that connection, have that vulnerability kind of come out in those characters and have everything kind of go off to. There's almost like a shifting dynamic as that film goes along, whereas Sarah kind of comes off as much more assertive, more proactive in the story. She becomes a little bit stronger and more assertive as the story goes along. In this one, Scott Speedman's character of Michael really doesn't get that. He's a little bit more kind of pushed and pulled through the entire story here, where it's by Celine or it's getting pulled off by the lycans, stuff like that. He's kind of yanked around the entire story here without having a good sense of agency about where he stands, about everything. He's just kind of like impacted by the plot and be reactive to things. He's not very much proactive in that regard. So it's kind of a faulty thing about the screenplay. It doesn't really kind of inject enough of a strength and assertiveness about the character of Michael Corvin here to be his own independent type of character here, to make his own choices, make his own movements forward through the entire story here. So he's very much at the mercy of the circumstances of the plot, and there's not as much of a spark or much warmth between the characters as you need to have to really kind of make it very convincing that these two are very much that deeply in love. Not quite as much of a problem with the casting or the acting, it's just more the fact that the screenplay really didn't get to the places it needed to get to make those characters kind of function on the best ways possible, to have as much of a passionate emotion involved with the relationship in the entire film. And because Michael really doesn't become that proactive character by the end of the film, not developed that well to that point, when he does become this vampire-lycan hybrid, it just doesn't feel quite earned. It doesn't feel quite as impactful. It just doesn't quite feel like a strong enough turn in the entire film there, because I've always been a little bit disappointed by the design of it in this film. I think, again, in Evolution, they did some things to improve the design overall. It looked a lot more evolved to a certain degree, not to put a pun on it or whatnot, but I felt like they really developed that look much stronger in the sequel. This one just never really did it for me. It just feels too much like a vampire just with blue skin and just a couple of claws or whatnot. It just felt like very underwhelming, considering the entire film was kind of building up to the fact that this was going to happen. Very much underdeveloped in that regard overall with the character, his progression entire film, and the design of the character at the end of the film just really just disappointed me from the first time I watched it all the way up to now. It was a little anticlimactic overall with what they did with Michael's character here and how they execute that design. It felt like very underwhelming to such a great degree, but So it's absolutely not underwhelming whatsoever is Michael Sheen portraying Lucien here, where I think he's the best character in the entire film here because he has an arc and he has this tragic backstory to a certain degree where I almost feel like it's better to watch the prequel, Rise of the Lycans, before this, if you're watching it for the first time to a certain degree, so you can get that full sense of his entire arc from the beginnings, being the slave to the vampires and Victor and stuff like that, and having that progression in the relationship with Sonia and the tragedy that befalls him and stuff like that, and he lashes out to become this leader of the lycans and whatnot. And then you see this much more, I don't know if it's downtrodden or whatnot, but this more kind of the darker end towards the end of his life here, that this final phase of everything he's going through to finally get this bitter revenge or whatnot upon Victor and stuff like that. And to see that it gives more context when he's looking at the end of the film over towards Michael and Celine there and seeing they have that sort of romantic relationship, and he's kind of, you can feel that sort of, he's thinking back to him and Sonia, and he's feeling like I can bequeath this upon them, stuff like that. It just feels like there's more context, more weight to his story if you've seen that other film before this one, and kind of give that overall arc a lot more poignance to it overall whatnot. But I think Sheen's fantastic. He's got a great commanding performance in the entire film, just like when you first see him, you know, he's not a tall guy or whatnot, but he just projects it so much. How he handles himself, how he carries himself. He's got a very ferocious quality when he's going off and he attacks Michael in the elevator or whatnot, and the makeup effects help a whole lot too, but he sells every single second of this entire character with all the depths and layers. He's the most dimensional character on screen because he shows that empathy, that sympathy, that sadness to the character, whatnot, the things that he lost because of this vengeful quality about Victor, whatnot, his very oppressive nature, whatnot. He lost someone he deeply loved, and he's just been wrapped up with all this bitterness crested over top of him and whatnot. So he's just trying to find this one last thing to kind of just usurp Victor in a certain way, kind of end this war that he started, whatnot. But I just like so much everything he does in the entire film. It's so very well done, where, of course, the narrative has all these weird twists and turns. When the first time I watched this film, I didn't like it at all because they're just, you really had to keep reassessing where the plot landed every couple of minutes. Because first you start with Lucien believing that he's the villain of the entire film, but eventually, like halfway through the film, you kind of realize, well, he's not really the villain, but he's teamed up with Craven, who's definitely a villain. He's definitely an antagonist. You don't like Craven whatsoever. He's a jackass. But he's teamed up with Craven and stuff like that, so you get pivoting over this way where it's like, okay, he's not actually the bad guy, but then Victor, who you thought was kind of like the alpha male, whatnot, the alpha vampire in a certain way, being like the big champion to come through and everything, he's actually the very, very worst guy of them all. So it's a little too twisty and turny and whatnot to kind of land in a certain way to kind of figure out and assess where the story is kind of landing and whose allegiances were where, and it was very confusing. So it's very confusing going through the film the first time, but once I kind of watched it a couple more times, it really kind of landed a little bit better for me overall. But seeing where his character is through this entire arc, knowing where it goes, it's a very full and fleshed out arc here that I really thought Sheen nailed the living hell out of it completely. But speaking of Craven, I actually do like Craven. Shane Brolly, I think he does a really good job playing a great snake in the grass character because, like I said, when you got all these allegiances and whatnot, kind of twisting and turning and flipping and flopping the entire film, Craven's just straight up. He's the same character at the end of the film as he was at the beginning, with just a little bit more context to why he is what he is. But he's still the same jackass all the way through the film. He's still this antagonistic jerk to a certain degree, but you kind of understand more of it later on when you find out he's a keeper of secrets about all the dirty little things that Victor's been going on with, all the allegiances he has with Lucien. So he feels a little bit entitled. He's been under the thumb of freaking Victor or whatnot, keeping his dirty, dark secrets or whatnot, and not really getting quite as much for it as he would think he should. He's conniving. He's got all these power plays he's trying to work out with, like trying to court Celine to a certain degree, pull her towards his side. And all the different things he's got going on, the duplicities and all the little shady things everyone's going on. It's great. He plays the role so completely right. Having this character is just like, you have to have one character where everyone's flipping and flopping allegiances all over the thing. One person to have a straight line through the entire film who's just a complete jackass, stabbing people in the back. He shoots Lucien right in the freaking back because it suits his purposes right in the moment there, because everything's falling apart and stuff like that. Victor's awake again. I love it. I love what Shane Brolly does with the character here. He's just a straight up character. You don't have any illusions about everything. He doesn't have any excuses for what he's doing. He's just a jackass, and that's a fantastic thing to have in this whole thing. But I also like Sophia Myles here. She's putting Erica, this kind of the same thing with Craven. She's a little bit kind of looking towards a little bit more subversive, a little more subtle in what she's doing here, trying to get a little bit kind of cozied up to him in a certain way, trying to work her way up in the hierarchy of everything here, and not quite getting the affection or whatnot, the kind of appreciation that she has for trying to be super loyal to everything here and there and everywhere, and still trying to push things here and there, but Craven always gets a little bit temperamental of certain things when things just go a little bit awry and certain things going off with Celine that are off plan or whatnot, so she gets a little bit dismissed here and there and everywhere. I think she's absolutely fantastic. I loved her in the sci-fi film Outlander, which I reviewed some time ago. She was great in that too. She's a really solid talent. She would actually show up, be kind of a regular in the TV series Moonlight with Alex O'Loughlin, which was also kind of a vampire-themed TV series that ran for like a season. But I think she's a really, really good talent. And apparently, according to something that she tweeted out a couple of years ago, not too many years ago, but apparently people are asking her about why Erica never showed up in any of the other films. And apparently, because there's this whole complicated mess, as much as there's soap opera stuff in the entire course of the narrative of the film, there are things behind the scenes, because apparently Kate Beckinsale and Michael Sheen had a kid together and they were in a relationship until she transferred over to being in a relationship with Len Wiseman, who ended up getting a divorce at the same point in time. Then they married, but then later on, about 2015, 2016, they divorced. And apparently, what Sophia Myles said, that Len Wiseman told her that Beckinsale didn't want her in the sequels for some reason or whatnot. So things happening here and there and everywhere in that regard. So it's unfortunate, because I think she would have really added something when you got all these other things going on in later sequels with different factions, different covens going in and out. I think she could have played a really solid role in something here and there or whatnot, but I still think she's a really solid talent, and she did a really good job here. I like everything she's doing. Very alluring type of quality in the entire film. She's very much self-serving, but she's just playing a chess game here and there that really doesn't get a payoff, which is kind of a sad type of thing, but I think she does a remarkable job in the entire film. But you got to talk about Bill Nighy, and that's the correct pronunciation of his last name. It's not Nighy or anything else. He's confirmed his actual pronunciation is Nighy, so don't confuse him with the science guy. His name is Bill Nighy, and he's a marvelous actor. Everyone knows this. He's so diverse in what he can bring to the screen. He can do comedy, he can do drama, he can do anything you give him. And he's fantastic as Victor. Just this sort of regal, proud, theatrical performance he has. Just like one of these guys who knows how to use the screen, how to use the stage in front of him, not have to do things so big. Subtle little things he can do in the entire thing, where he's got this entire regeneration cycle he's going through, being fed the blood or whatnot. So he's not going to be super animated when he first shows up on screen. He's going to be a little bit more subtle. He's going to be a little bit more hunched over or whatnot, but he's got that commanding voice and that presence. He can bring forward the gravitas, what he wants to bring forward with this elderly character in the entire film. It's so good. He's so perfectly cast. He brings so much weight to the character of Victor. When you're spending all this time kind of talking about him here and there, looking over the tomb or whatnot, and then having him resurrected and kind of talking about him here and there, and when he comes on screen, it's not a disappointment. It's just excels so much what he does on screen. This guy can do everything you possibly want him to do, and all underneath all this phenomenal makeup work he's been given is fantastic. Great type of stuff. He just absolutely relished the entire opportunity to do that. Every time he came back to the role later on, mainly in Rise of Lycans, masterful stuff. Perfect casting in this whole thing. He does such a great job bringing a very vicious, deadly wrath when you really get into the later parts of the film. Perfect type of stuff. Just all day long, could talk about him. He's amazing. But like I said, I really do like the cast overall here. You got Kevin Grevioux, one of the screenwriters, portraying Reyes here with his naturally very deep voice and very intimidating presence here, but really good thing on that regard. You got Erwin doing a really distinct job at singing here, that lycan scientist or whatnot, kind of figuring out the entire hybrid genetics and whatnot. Really good thing on him. And Robbie McGee portraying Khan here is like a nice nice collection of different actors here with certain distinct qualities about them to bring forth very nice characters in that regard. Moving on to the film's score, composed by Paul Hassinger, it's like, as in a nice mix of the orchestral and the electronic sort of industrial percussive stuff and the whole thing. It's like nice dark ominous moods, like some haunting gothic atmosphere gets in the whole thing. It's like it's a nicely well designed score for the entire film, just taps into the tones of it overall. And there's still an orchestral score album available if you want to get it off of iTunes. Also has the song Red Tape from Agent Provocateur, which is not included in the film, but widely used in all the marketing for the first two films. So you can get that only on the original score album. It's not included on the much more widely available soundtrack album with all the licensed songs for the entire film, with a bunch of industrial rock tracks and stuff like that going on, the whole thing. Not really my thing, but it aids into the sonic vibes the entire film is entirely going for that's completely of the time it was released. So still works out very well, even though some people might feel it's maybe a tad dated in some place, but it still functions. It still does go towards the entire style the film's projecting itself into. But you also have to kind of look at how Len Wiseman kind of deals with the action in the entire film. And like I said, it is a stylish film, but it is kind of just borrowing a lot of stuff that was very common at the time, how the thing goes off. But credit where credit is due, it's very technically well done. Everything going on with all the sequences, but it's a little less than imaginative. Like, you got all this stuff with vampires and werewolves. You want to see some creative things going on in the whole thing. It's just like, it's a lot of gunfights. Just everyone pulling out guns and shooting stuff here and there. It's very minimal when they get into something a little bit more fresher. Like at the end of the film when Ray turns into the big lycanthrope and you got the guy with the whips and everything. That's a very good sequence. It's a very smart type of thing. Bring out some different types of weapons. Like when Celine brings out those like razor edge discs or whatnot at the end of the opening sequence. It's a nice weapon to kind of add into the entire thing. Make it a little bit more varied. That's what you're kind of looking for in this whole thing. And take advantage of the concept here where you can get a little bit different with the entire weapons you can go off with, or the way they can engage in physical combat in some places like that. So it's a little less than imaginative in what you could do with the entire concept here in terms of the action. Even though all the action is very well handled, it just feels a little worn out. The ideas and whatnot. It's all just shootouts and whatnot, aside from a few minor pieces here and there. We get into the next couple of films, they get a lot more fresher with things, especially in Evolution. I've always felt like Underworld Evolution was a much fresher film. It's a little more charismatic. The action sequences are a lot more varied, especially when you get the entire thing where Marcus becomes a hybrid himself. He's a giant bat. You get a lot of different things you get off with much more dynamic ideas. Things much more dynamically shot. It's a lot more exciting, energetic type of film to work towards the ends of those different things. So I think they just learned a lot more things in terms of just how to make the action more satisfying going forward in the franchise, but we'll get on to other things as we talk about sequels in a bit. But talking about the story in general here is like, it's okay. The whole summation of the film is like I said before, I didn't like the film when I first saw it because I was very engaged with the film. In terms of like getting up to release, when I first heard about the concept, I thought it was pretty cool, pretty awesome. I got kind of excited about the trailers or whatnot, but when release week came and the reviews were coming out and very negative type of stuff, I was turned off from it, so I didn't really watch it until DVD. And then, like I said, the entire twisting plot really kind of confused me, left me hanging in so many places. But when I did eventually get sold on going to see Underworld Evolution in the theaters, I revisited the first film in its extended unrated form, and it's grown on me. I liked it a lot more when I actually kind of had a clear vision of exactly where the story was going. You're kind of like Michael and the whole thing. It's like he doesn't know what the fuck's going on. Everything's kind of a whirlwind around him. He doesn't know where anyone stands or where everything's going in this entire thing, who to trust, what's going on with him. It's a little too of a blizzard swirling around you in a certain way to really get a hold on exactly where the story is going every 5 to 10 minutes or whatnot, because everyone's allegiances keep shifting here and there. You don't know exactly who to trust and who's exactly on what side or whatnot. So it's a little too convoluted to a certain degree. There's too many things going on that just you don't have a clear sensibility about when you're watching the first time where everything's laying out and everything's just going off in too many directions. That's why I say watching Rise of the Lycans first would kind of help you better understand the context of the first movie, to understand where everything is going and kind of have a little bit more perception of certain things, and just the kind of hook of Victor being the betrayer or whatnot of Celine's confidence and whatnot when he was the one who slain all her family and then turned her because she appeared to be a lot more reminding him of Sonia, which is an interesting type of thing to kind of bring up here because in the original version of the film, which was released theatrically, everything on DVD and the original Blu-rays, the role of Sonia was portrayed by actress Jasmine Damick, who was blonde-haired. But after Underworld Rise of the Lycans, where the role was recast with Rona Mitra, they went back and re-edited the original Underworld with footage from Rise of the Lycans instead. So that's the version on most streaming services, I think, and on the 4K version of the film. Now, on the version of the film, which was included on the box set, the original scenes are included as a special feature, separate from the film. The version seen in the film is the one with Rona Mitra, that footage from Rise of the Lycans. So, weird type of things how they did that and went back and stuff like that. So, some certain streaming services don't have the redone version, they have the original version, so you kind of have to go back around. I know, like, Movies Anywhere has the re-edited version, but I think the one on Vudu does not. So, it might be a bit of a thing depending on which HD or 4K version, where the hell you're watching, who knows, whatever, but how they futz around with that thing is an entire different story on that regard. But it is the thing, like, having Rona Mitra being Sonia, just kind of like, she bears a much more stronger resemblance to Kate Beckinsale, so you could just see that clearly towards the ends, like, at first sight, Victor would see Celine and is like, be reminded of his own daughter that he's slain and whatnot. But some of the very first Underworld film here is the fact that it's gotten a lot of criticism. People find it tedious, it's kind of slow, people find it boring. They praise the style to it, and certainly the fact that it does takes itself seriously, and it's not kind of a ridiculous schlock fest to a certain degree, like maybe like a Queen of the Damned or something else like that. It's at least putting in a genuine effort to make the thing a good quality, respectable production, but it does have flaws, like I've said. There are certain things about the thing is the fact that the characters do feel a little too closed off to a certain degree. It's playing it almost too melodramatic to a certain degree, too soap opera-esque, where it doesn't open itself up to some little bit of levity here and there. When you kind of look and compare it over to like Blade, which is clearly a bit on the derivative side towards, when you still have that Wesley Snipes character in there, he is a very stoic, kind of cold figure, but he still has those moments where the charisma can shine the whole thing. They add moments in there where you can see a little bit of a humor to the character. Some of the things you can work with here and there in terms of like certain funny lines of dialogue or certain things are just very exciting to a certain degree. So there's a lot of elements to that film that I extremely well praised in my review a couple of years ago that just showed that in fact it was such a crowd-pleasing film that still had those moments to really kind of push it towards a fun action blockbuster. Underworld's just a little removed to that whole thing. It doesn't open itself up to be as fun as it possibly can be while still taking itself majorly seriously. So the tone of it really kind of oppresses to a certain degree. It doesn't really kind of allow it to kind of breathe and flex and open up to a certain degree. So the thing that had its niche to a certain degree to kind of hook itself into, but really just is always right at this line about mediocrity as the franchise is going on. Like I've pretty much made very clear in this whole thing, I very much liked Underworld Evolution so much. It's a lot thinner on the plot because there's a lot fewer characters. You kind of wiped out the covens to a large degree, so it's a lot more narrowly focused, doesn't have quite as much substance to it overall when you got the character of Marcus, portrayed by Tony Curran, who I think is also a wonderful actor, becoming this hybrid bat character that's just looking to kind of usurp his own father, who was the original immortal who gave birth to him, and his brother William, who's like the first vampire, the first werewolf, stuff like that. So it's kind of going off to a certain degree, kind of adding on to certain things in terms of story here to kind of push the lore mythology a little further, but doesn't quite have as much sort of emotional substance to a degree to have the stakes and whatnot in terms of what's going on with Celine and certainly Michael in a certain way. But I think it's a much funner film. The action sequences are so much more dynamic. It's a new cinematographer for the whole thing, and he's doing a lot of different things to make the action more visually appealing. They're doing a lot more interesting things and showing what a vampire can do opposed to like a human. They can move so much faster, have so much more agility. So you can definitely see that thing, how they're kind of like pinpointing what the vampires can do in a much more of a power-based sense, and see what you can kind of play with a little bit more, have more interesting and varied action sequences that are not just gunplay, but you can have a lot more physical things going on when you got Marcus in this giant bat form flying around, that got the car chase, stuff like that. A lot more interesting things. So not as satisfying as like, as much of the first film is so complicated, this one's much more streamlined to a degree that doesn't have quite as much story things to really kind of get off as a catharsis, but the action does take center stage to make it much more entertaining film. Underworld Rise of the Lycans is an interesting type of thing that I've kind of had a minor comment here or there about before, but I think it's a good film. But the fact is, it comes after two different films that have bogged down a lot of backstory to it, that the fact is, by the time you get to a prequel, all they do is actually show you everything they've already told you in the previous two films, so there's not really anything new to learn from it. So it's like, it's an extremely well-directed film from Patrick Tatopoulos, the creature designer and eventual production designer on the franchise. And Rhoda Mitra, like I said, she's fantastic. Michael Sheen gets to step up in the center stage here as the main protagonist, as Lucian, kind of showing his rise to power and stuff like that. And Bill Nighy, also fantastic as well. So they bring back some really fantastic actors, bring in another actor who's really fantastic as well to add to the entire mythology here. But like I said, it's a really good film. It just doesn't have a purpose to it in terms of like coming after two films and then showing the backstory that everyone's already gone over in great detail already. So it's one of those things, like, it fits better watching it first than watching the other two films, as it has more of a purpose to itself than just kind of showing you what you've already been told in the previous films. But it is a very good film. Even if the CGI is starting to show its weaknesses here and there, there's not as good of a CGI and effects work done in Rise of the Lycans as there were in the previous two films. Then you go over to Underworld Awakening, which I feel is kind of the worst in the franchise because it takes off in a much more overtly science fiction direction where Celine's been captured. She's been in like a cryogenic freeze for like 12 years, and she comes out to an entire world that's humans are now aware of vampires and lycans, so now the humans are kind of like the alphas in the situation, and it's less Underworld in that regard. It's like everyone's exposed now, so there's not much of that type of thing. But you get Charles Dance in the whole thing, who's always good. It's always fun. Alien 3, Last Action Hero, Golden Child. Always brings something very good to something that maybe you're not too fond of, but he's a very good actor, adds something to the whole thing. It's very nice, but generally the characters aren't as interesting as the ones you had before that had all these long backstories or whatnot, really kind of these long lineages and legacies they had to bring into the whole thing and give a lot of texture to the entire film. Now it's getting a little thin. It's not quite as good. The action was kind of okay. It felt like, when I watched Underworld Awakening, it felt like a direct-to-video film that was only elevated to theatrical sets because of the production quality of it, in terms of like the stunt work and various other things. So I didn't care for it a whole lot. And leading up to Underworld Awakening, they actually produced a trio of anime shorts called Underworld Endless War, and this was included on an earlier Blu-ray box set and now on the 4K box set. But it followed Celine through 3 different time periods, kind of hunting down this band of Lycan brothers, and it's like, I really liked it. If you could have given me more of this type of thing, like an anime series based on Underworld, I would have much appreciate. Like, did a lot of things that are kind of skewed towards, like, maybe like that old Todd McFarlane Spawn HBO series. You could have a lot of adult content, a lot of graphic violence, a lot of things going on with it. It would just free you up to do a lot more things with the franchise without spending quite as much money as you would on a theatrical live-action feature. I thought it had a lot of potential, but it seemed like the only thing they really did in that regard, but I thought it was a very good type of thing they produced there. The last one they put out was Underworld Blood Wars, which, again, the CGI gets worse and worse. It just gets really, really worse. Despite the fact that they're putting more money into this than they did in the first two films, the CGI starts looking worse. Probably just because they're leaning on the CGI more than actually doing more practical stuff like Len Wiseman did at the beginning of the entire franchise here. So it's really, really bad CGI. It's really, really bad. You don't even really want to see the CGI in the film. The story's a little bit better. I think it's a little better than Awakening. It feels a little bit more back to the sort of stories you had in the first couple films, tying more back into just the vampire Lycan war to a certain degree, and there's a new Lycan leader and stuff like that. But the weird-ass freaking thing they kept doing in this franchise is the fact that after Evolution, Scott Speedman didn't want to come back to the role. But the fact is, you built up this entire relationships thing between Michael and Celine here, and they kept just trying to dodge around the fact they didn't have Scott Speedman and they didn't want to recast the role for some reason, so they still had the plots centering around Michael to a certain degree, but he's not in the films really. They have like maybe a stand-in character from a very long shot or something else like that that's very obscured. They're kind of danced around the fact that they don't have Speedman. I just don't know why you wouldn't just decide, okay, if he doesn't want to come back, either you write a story that doesn't have anything to do with him, or you just find someone else to put in the role. As simple as that. So it's like, it was just kind of just kind of an obvious glaring thing in Awakening and Blood Wars, that they're much more trying to like hinge the plot upon his existence without actually having the character present in the story. So we get the Blood Wars and they do some other things that really kind of just really tarnish that character to a very hard degree. It just feels kind of cheap and very much kind of a backhanded type of thing to do to the character. So on that regards, like, Blood Wars is better than Awakening to a certain degree, but it's not that much better. Some things aren't. Some things are worse. Some things are a little bit better in the story areas, but worse in the effects and how they're kind of carrying on that kind of story there. So it's kind of a here or there type of thing. I really can't give you a definitive thing on that regard, but the first 3 films are the strongest ones in the franchise. The next ones are just kind of turned into almost like B-movie schlock. And so it's like, it's always been kind of a frustrating franchise to that degree. It's like, you never been able to really take the essence of the concept you had to really get it up there to get on the level of like a Blade or really a crowning jewel in that kind of genre, that kind of horror action genre type of thing that really could show itself to a great degree. So it's always been on that weird kind of like just a B-movie level type of thing that really didn't capitalize fully on its potential, but still has an allure, still a great appeal to it. The style of it is really, really good. Beckinsale does good things in the whole thing. Of course, she's alluring to her own degree, being wrapped up in vinyl and latex and leather and stuff like that. That gets people on to a certain degree and stuff like that, but she's good. She handles the action stuff extremely well, and she carried the franchise in a very good way, so I think she's acted very well in the franchise, so good things all around. So I'd like to hear what you guys feel about the Underworld franchise, film by film, or in general, or anything like that, what you would really like to express in regards to what I've discussed here. So thanks so much, guys, for enjoying this video and watching that and stuff like that. So the comments, the likes, the subscribes do a great thing here. Sharing the links around on social media does a great thing. And if you can, you support us on Patreon to get a little early access to everything released here on the channel, plus a downloadable archive of every single audio commentary we've ever done, which is over 150 now. And there's always the super things featured on every single video here on the channel. Hit that. You can contribute whatever money you want to the channel to keep us going. I would still produce great stuff. And thank you so very much, guys, for supporting things, watching things, and all the different stuff. So thanks so much. Take care. Bye-bye.